Welcome to Ben Talks Hockey History, where we bring the most unexpected and fascinating tales from hockey's rich past to life. I'm your host, Ben, and today we're traveling back to 1950, a time when the world was a different place, yet the game of hockey still had the power to unite people in the most unlikely of circumstances. Our story begins in the rugged, snow-covered Upper Peninsula of Michigan at a place called Marquette Prison, a maximum security facility known for housing the state's most dangerous criminals. In a twist of fate, the Detroit Red Wings, arguably the best hockey team in the world at the time, found themselves squaring off against a team of inmates called Emery's Boys. What led to this bizarre matchup? How did the Red Wings, who were at that point the dominating team in the NHL, end up playing hockey with murderers and arsonists in the dead of winter? And what was the game like in an era when hockey was grittier, tougher, and played with a raw edge? Buckle up, because this is a story you won't forget. This episode is titled The Wildest Game Ever Played, the Detroit Red Wings versus Emery's Boys. Part 1, the 1950s, a different era for hockey and the world. To truly understand the gravity of this story, we need to step back in time to the 1950s. This was an era when hockey was rough and tumble and played without protective equipment, much like we take for granted today. Helmets? Forget about it. Composite sticks? Nope. Players skated with minimal gear, relying on grit, toughness, and raw skill to make their mark on the ice. Even the goaltenders didn't start wearing masks or helmets until the late 50s. The first hockey goaltender to wear a practical mask was Jacques Plante of the Montreal Canadiens on November 1st, 1959. And the last goalie to not wear a mask was Detroit Red Wings goaltender Andy Brown, who didn't retire until the late 70s. Off the ice, the world was in throes of post-World War II boom. The NHL was a 6-team league, tightly knit and fiercely competitive. The Detroit Red Wings were the crown jewel of the league, having won the Stanley Cup in 1950, 52, and again in 54, the year this episode was written about. The team was led by legends like Gordie Howe, known as Mr. Hockey, and Ted Lindsay, whose ferocious style earned him the nickname Terrible Ted. These players weren't just athletes, they were cultural icons. Meanwhile, in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, life was harsh. The region's frigid winters and remote location made it a place of both beauty and isolation. At Marquette Prison, often called the Alcatraz of the North, life was even harsher. This maximum security facility was home to the state's most dangerous criminals, men who had screwed up several times, as Leonard Okie Brum put it. Built in the late 1800s, the prison was designed to be impenetrable and unyielding. By the 1950s, conditions remained grim. Prisoners were confined to small cells without plumbing, enduring sub-zero temperatures with only minimal clothing, because the warden feared that the long underwear they had might give the escapees an edge in the wilderness. This was a place where hope was hard to find, and every day felt like a punishment. But amid the bleakness, an unlikely spark of joy and camaraderie was about to ignite, thanks to a visionary warden and an enterprising hockey enthusiast. Warden Emery Jacques firmly believed that recreation could help ease tensions and provide inmates with a constructive outlet. His philosophy led him to hire Leonard Okie Brum as the prison's first athletic director in 1953. Brum was no stranger to the game of hockey. A University of Michigan alum, he had been part of the school's 1948 championship team and later coached and built hockey programs in Alaska. When he arrived at Marquette, he saw not just a prison, but a chance to make a difference. Using his construction expertise and materials donated by his father, Brum built a walled, regulation-sized rink in the prison yard, the first of its kind in any American prison. The introduction of hockey was no small feat. Hockey sticks had been banned in the prison for years due to their potential as weapons, and most inmates had never even skated before. Instead of traditional ice hockey, they had been playing a rudimentary version of kick hockey, essentially soccer on ice. But Brum was determined to bring the real hockey to Marquette. He worked tirelessly to acquire equipment, eventually receiving a generous donation from Jack Adams, GM of the Detroit Red Wings, who sent gear from the recently disbanded Omaha Knights, a Wings farm team. The jerseys even bore the name Emery's Boys, a tribute to the warden. Brum began assembling a team from the prison's population. Most of the inmates were in their 30s and 40s, well past their athletic prime, and many could barely skate. Practices were chaotic, with players smoking on the ice, making side bets with cartons of cigarettes, and occasionally concealing makeshift weapons in their uniforms. Yet Brum persevered, instilling a sense of discipline and teamwork among this ragtag group. Over time, the rink became more than just a patch of ice. It became a place of pride, escape, and where even the most hardened men could feel like part of a team. Part 2. The Red Wings and their 1953-54 barnstorming season. The 1953-54 season was a defining one for the Detroit Red Wings. As one of the NHL's original 6 teams, the Red Wings were not just competing for glory, they were setting the standard for excellence in professional hockey. Under management of Jack Adams and the coaching of Tommy Ivan, Detroit was home to some of the greatest players the game had ever seen. Gordie Howe, Ted Lindsay, and Red Kelly, among others, were in their prime, leading the league in both skill and toughness. During this era, it wasn't uncommon for NHL teams to participate in barnstorming tours, exhibition games played outside their regular schedule. These games served multiple purposes. They were a way to grow the sport in smaller, hockey-starved communities, build goodwill among fans, and of course, generate additional revenue for the teams. For the Red Wings, these games also provided opportunities to keep their players sharp and showcase the team's dominance to audiences far from the NHL's urban hubs. The Marquette game, however, was unlike anything the Red Wings had ever encountered. Instead of playing in a small-town rink or a community arena, they'd be stepping onto the ice inside a maximum security prison. Their opponents? A group of inmates with little hockey experience. How do you approach a game like that? For the Red Wings, the answer was simple. Treat it like any other game, with professionalism and sportsmanship that made them legends. By the time they arrived at Marquette on February 2nd, 1954, the Red Wings were in top form. They had just come off a back-to-back victory versus Chicago Blackhawks and were poised for a championship run. But even these seasoned players couldn't help but feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension as they prepared to face Emery's boys. Part 3. The day of the game. Two worlds collide. The morning of February 2nd, 1954, must have been surreal for everyone involved. The Red Wings arrived at the Marquette County Airport on a twin-prop DC-3, stepping off the plane into biting cold of Upper Michigan's Peninsula. As they approached the prison gates, the usual pregame chatter faded into an uneasy silence. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. For the inmates, this was more than just a game. It was a rare chance to see the outside world brought to them. Many had spent years listening to the Red Wings games on the radio, imagining the skill and the grace of players like Gordie Howe and Ted Lindsay. Now those same players were skating onto a rink in their yard. When the Red Wings stepped onto the ice, they were greeted with cheers and shouts of encouragement. For a moment, the barriers between inmates and visitors dissolved, replaced by the shared love of hockey. Then the puck dropped, and from the very first moments, it was clear that this wasn't going to be a close contest. The Red Wings dominated possession, their precise passing and fluid skating, leaving Emery's boys chasing shadows. For the professional players, it was almost like a training session, but for the inmates, it was a surreal and unforgettable experience. One of the most memorable moments came courtesy of Ted Lindsay. Ever the showman, Lindsay handed a puck to the inmate and encouraged him to take a shot. The inmate, unimpressed with Lindsay's theatrics, shot back an "F you, Ted, I ain't going." The crowd of inmates erupted in laughter, a rare moment of levity that echoed across the prison yard. As the game progressed, some Red Wings players swapped jerseys with the inmates to even the odds. The sight of Gordie Howe or Ted Lindsay skating in the green uniform of Emery's boys was enough to draw cheers and whistles from the onlookers. Lindsay, fully embracing the fun of the situation, skated up to the warden, Emery Jacques, and quipped, in his best gangster impression, "We'll win this one, see, and be out of here in 2 years." Despite the score, which was so lopsided it wasn't officially recorded after the first period, the game was a display of grace and sportsmanship. Terry Sawchuk, the Red Wings' legendary goalie, spent most of the game sitting on top of his net, bored by the lack of action. At one point, he skated out to play the puck himself, drawing cheers from the inmates. It was fun, Sawchuk later said, but humbling too. These guys didn't have much, and we were giving them something they'd never forget. Leonard Brum, who had installed himself on the defense for Emery's boys, later joked, "The only time I touched the puck was when I pulled it out of the back of the net." Yet, even in defeat, the inmates marveled at the skill and the professionalism of the Red Wings. You realized how good they were, Brum reflected. Their skating, their passing, it was something you didn't get to see in a tight-checking NHL game. For the inmates, the game was more than a spectacle. It was a chance to feel human, to share the ice with legends, and to experience a slice of freedom, even if only for a few hours. For the Red Wings, it was a reminder of the simple joys of the game and the ways hockey could bring people together, no matter how different their lives might be. Part 4, A Lasting Legacy. By the end of the game, the score didn't matter. What stayed with everyone involved was a sense of camaraderie and connection. The Red Wings joined the inmates for a dinner that evening, sharing stories and laughter around a communal table. For a few hours, the lines between professional athletes and prisoners blurred. Each Red Wings player received a handcrafted leather wallet as a token of appreciation, and Jack Adams, the team's GM, was presented with a honey bucket, a refuse pail used by inmates in their cells. Ever the showman, Adams hoisted the bucket high and declared, "This is a great day." Gordie Howe, who rarely gave out compliments, called the prison ice the best I've ever skated on, a testament to the effort and care Leonard Brum and the inmates had poured into building the rink. For Brum, it was a moment of pride, validating the work that he had done to bring hockey to a place where hope was often in short supply. The game's impact extended far beyond the walls of Marquette Prison. For years after the event, Jack Adams continued donating equipment to Emery's boys, ensuring that hockey remained a fixture at the life of the prison. The inmates, many of them who would never leave Marquette, carried the memory of the game with them. "We weren't just prisoners that day," one inmate reportedly said. "We were hockey players." For the Red Wings, the Marquette game had become part of the lore of their legendary 1953-54 season. The team went on to win the Stanley Cup that year, defeating the Montreal Canadiens in a dramatic 7-game series. The victory cemented the Red Wings' status as one of the greatest teams of the era. Years later, players like Gordie Howe and Ted Lindsay still spoke fondly of the prison game, recalling it as one of the most unique and meaningful moments of their careers. Part 5, Reflections on Key Figures. The people behind this remarkable story are just as fascinating as the game itself. Leonard "Okie" Brum, the man who made it all possible, left Marquette in 1957, but immortalized the event in his book, We Only Played Home Games. The book, filled with humor and insight, captured not only the game, but the spirit of hope and humanity that hockey brought to the prison. Warden Emery Jacques, whose belief in the rehabilitative power of sports, who made the game possible, continued to advocate for programs that gave inmates a sense of purpose and dignity. His bold decision to host the Red Wings at Marquette was a risk, but it paid off in ways he couldn't have imagined. And then there were the inmates, the men who had seen the darkest sides of life, yet found joy and pride in sharing the ice with legends. For some, it was a highlight of their time behind bars, a moment when they could forget their past and feel like part of something bigger. And that's the story of the wildest game in hockey history. A day when the best team in the NHL stepped onto the ice inside of a maximum security prison, proving that hockey has the power to connect us all, no matter where we're from. And before I go, I want to take a moment to give credit where it's due. Much of this detailed information of this episode comes from an article written by Richard Back, whose exceptional storytelling brought this unique event to life. I also want to acknowledge Leonard Oakey Brum and his book, We Only Played Home Games, which provided a first-hand account of his time at Marquette Prison and the remarkable game we explored today. Thank you for joining me on this journey through hockey's past. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your fellow hockey fans. Stories like this remind us of the magic of the game and the ability to bridge worlds in the most unexpected ways. This has been Talks Hockey History, and until next time, stay out of the box, keep your stick on the ice, and keep your head up. We'll see you on the next episode.